Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Pointy Not Sharp. Today we're going to be discussing the Italian BM59 bayonet. Now this bayonet is also used for the Italian AR70, although in a slightly different configuration. We'll get into that shortly. Now the rifle that this bayonet is designed for is the Italian 7.62 NATO BM59, which is like their take on the M1 Garand. And that started development in 1959, hence the name, BM59, and it didn't start production until 1962. They've used this rifle all the way through until 1990, where the Army retired it, but I believe their Navy still use it today, and it's still used in ceremonial roles. Now, that rifle itself, it's essentially just a M1 Garand made by Beretta with a whole bunch of modern features on it. So you've got select fire, you've got a box magazine, bipod, and rifle grenade sights. Other than that, it's just an M1 Garand, nothing too fancy. Now, Beretta did manage to make these a lot quicker, or develop them a lot quicker and a lot cheaper than the US did with the M14, which was their take of a modernised M1 Garand. From what I can tell, they developed it in half the time and at a fraction of the cost. A BM59 in 1962 would only cost you $42, which is an amazing deal. And while the M14 was a bit of a flop, the BM59 was very, very popular and stayed in service for a very, very long time. Now, this bayonet was also used for the AR70, which was a later rifle that was adopted by Italy in the 70s, I think it is, and it takes the same style of bayonet with some subtle differences. So, the first difference is, while the BM59 has markings on it, the AR70 versions of this bayonet doesn't. And the other major difference is the handle itself. Instead of made of this brown polished, leathery looking plastic, they've gone to a handle that more resembles a US M7 bayonet like I have here. So as you can see, it's the black checkered handle that's probably a lot more common, or something good to come across more often than the Italian BM59s. Now, it's not clear exactly who made these bayonets. There's not a whole lot of records out there. However, we've got fantastic records on who made their M4 bayonets, which are virtually identical to these and were released prior to these. And we've also got records as to who made the AR70 bayonets, which came after. Both of those bayonets were made by the same company, so it's a fair bet to say that the BM59 was also made by the ARSENALE, ARSENALE TORINO, AET, and the TURIN Army Arsenal. I couldn't find any numbers as to how many were made, but I'm going to guess probably between 1 and 200,000. I wouldn't think any more than that. While they were made for other countries like Argentina and Indonesia, Indonesia produced their own style of bayonet, and I don't know what Argentina used. I imagine they probably would have just bought the Italian bayonets, because that's what they did with the FALs. They bought the Belgian bayonets. Anyway, that's a bit of a tangent. We'll forget that for now. Now, the bayonet itself, you've probably noticed, it's got that very iconic US M3 combat knife look to it. So this has taken inspiration from a line of bayonets that date back to that M3 combat knife from World War II. So that combat knife went on to inspire the US M4 bayonet for the M1 carbine. Then the Italians made their own version of that bayonet, their own version of the M4, which is virtually identical. The key difference being the handle, instead of being leather, is made out of this brown plastic, which is made to look like the leather. Then the BM59 itself is, it took all of its inspiration from the Italian M4. The only real difference is, while the M4 has a small muzzle ring to accommodate a small barrel, the BM59 has quite a large muzzle ring. Now, you'll hear people say that it was a copy of the M7 or the M6 bayonets because it has a larger muzzle ring. But they all adopted generally the same size muzzle ring for virtually the same reason. In the late 1950s, NATO adopted a new standard of rifle grenade, which was 22mm. So pretty much every country was redesigning their rifles with new muzzle devices to accommodate a 22mm rifle grenade, so they all had 22mm muzzle devices. As a result, the diameter of this muzzle ring is 22.1mm, and that's something you'll see fairly commonly across most of the NATO bayonets. They'll all sort of have that same size muzzle ring to accommodate the same size of rifle grenade. Like I've got an M7 here, and while the M7 is fractionally larger with the muzzle ring, not something you can really notice with the naked eye, I've actually got it written down here. So the BM59 has a muzzle ring diameter of 22.1mm, while the M7 has 22.4, so 0.3 of a millimeter difference in size. I'll put the M7 away for now. I find that interesting actually, because there's so many of these different NATO bayonets, and you never stop to think about the size of the muzzle ring being uniform to accommodate a rifle grenade. It's just not something that you'd stop to think about, but I found that quite interesting. And I imagine like the French model 1956 or 1958 bayonets for their Mas 49/56 rifles would be very, very similar. And yeah, probably the rest of the NATO bayonets as well, other than England and the Commonwealth, because they were using their L1A1, L1A2, L1A3 and C1 bayonets for their SLRs. Now, the BM59 was also used by Indonesia and Argentina, as I previously stated. Argentina used it in the Falklands War, and Indonesia used it in their invasion of East Timor. However, Indonesia had their own home-built bayonet. That being said though, even though they didn't adopt the BM59 bayonet itself, it did go on to inspire their next bayonet, which was the S1 for their SS1 rifle. And what really leads me to believe that this is the bayonet that inspired the S1 and not the US M7 is the muzzle ring diameter of the S1 is identical to the BM59, and from what I've read, it took inspiration from this and not the M7. You will commonly see it referred to as a Indonesian M7, but it's not. I'll do a video on one of them one day. I really want to get one. They're super cheap if you can head over to Indonesia, but they don't ship them internationally. Pain in the ass. Anyway, I'll jump into the construction. So we've got the classic M3 style blade with a true edge running down the full length, and then a unsharpened false edge running about halfway down. They've got manufacturer's markings on the ricasso here, so AET above our little cross buttons and sort of flaming bombs, and 1956. Now, I said earlier that these were made from 1962 until 1990, and the AR70 versions are still being made now. And this one has a manufacture date of 1956. Well, how can this be? My belief is that this is a M4 bayonet for the M1 carbine that was converted across to a BM59 in the early days. Either that, or this was made from spare parts when they had to start manufacturing these bayonets and they hadn't really got production rolling. But it's definitely for the BM59. I've checked the measurements, and that's definitely a BM59 muzzle ring. They've got our black plastic handle, retained by 2 screws. And the other interesting thing about the BM59 is it has the rounded pommel. Let me get the other one for comparison. So here's my M4. The rounded pommel of the M4 bayonet, as opposed to the very different shape you have on the M7, which is a bit blockier and has the the lugs that protrude out further and the larger mortise. And as you can see, the tang just terminates in the end of the pommel there. And this is made, it's a lot nicer and a lot prettier than the USM7s as well. As you can see, they're quite rough in comparison, whether this is quite nicely made. And obviously to use our locking device, you just press down on these two buttons on the outside. Focus please. And they just retract out there and unlock. Now taking a look at it, our locking surface within the mortise there is not ramped, so you will have to depress these to slide them onto the rifle. You can't just slide it on and have it snap in place. You physically cannot put this onto the rifle without depressing both of these. Now taking a look at our scabbard, it's just a US M8A1 scabbard, nothing too fancy about that. And same as what we have on the M4 here. But what I find interesting is when I turn it upside down, the frog is, it's out of frame, sorry about that. The frog is longer and it's also a darker green. So these were painted into sort of this olivey green, and so are the frogs, as you can see on the front of it, just spray painted, where the BM59 frog just comes in that green. Now, we've also got, probably should cover this earlier, a serial number on the reverse of the blade, so we've got 34048. I don't know if these were made to match rifles. I don't know if these were in the same numbering system as the M4s. I don't know how it worked. I haven't found any information. And other than that, we've got another mark down here on the crossguard, and that's a star, patent 71. And that's the marking you'll usually find on a BM59 bayonet on the Ricasso. So that's the typical marking. You'll have the star, pat, and then the year of manufacture. So I'm assuming this one here actually would have been made in 1971, and they just would have recycled a 1956 M4 blade, because as you can see, the blades are identical. Literally the only difference in construction is that muzzle ring. Well, this is a bayonet I've really enjoyed researching, and it's very, very well made as well. I wasn't expecting to like it so much leading into this video, but the more I read about it, the more I got to play with it, the more I really started to like it. I also went out the other day and got my hands on a BM59, had a feel of that. I didn't get to shoot it, but it's a very, very large and very, very chunky rifle, but it feels reasonably solid. And I can only imagine that it would have been a fantastic bayonet fighting rifle, because it's very, very solid. It's not rattling around. The bayonet would have fit very, very snugly on the end. And yeah, I don't really have anything else to add to that. Anyway, guys, if I've missed anything or made any mistakes, please feel free to comment below. Thanks for watching.